Okay, so jumping right into things today, we're diving deep into lichen sclerosus.
Yeah.
And, we've received a lot of questions from you guys about it, how it affects vaginal health. So, we figured it's time to take a closer look.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got some interesting material here that, sheds light on this condition. And our goal is to kind of extract the most important insights
Right.
to help you understand, what is this thing?
Yeah,
What's going on?
exactly.
And what can we do about it?
Yeah, I mean, from the research that you've provided, lichen sclerosus, it's a chronic inflammatory skin condition. It primarily affects the genital and anal areas, and we'll focus on the vaginal area for this particular deep dive. And as you said, we got a lot of questions from listeners, and, it can appear at any age. However, it is much more common in women after menopause.
Right. So something that a lot of people are dealing with.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things that, stood out to me from these sources is that it's not just about those, visible skin changes.
Right.
We're talking about the impact on the entire vaginal ecosystem. And that's kind of a big deal.
It is, and that's something that really needs to be highlighted. It's not just a superficial skin issue. It really affects the entire vaginal health, the environment.
Exactly. And it's like undermining,
A foundation.
the foundation of vaginal well-being.
Exactly.
So let's break down, how exactly does it do that, right? How does lichen sclerosus actually weaken the vaginal health? And the first thing that, the sources talk about is this thinning and weakening of the vaginal tissue itself.
Right, and that's, incredibly problematic because what happens is the tissue becomes fragile.
Right.
It can tear easily. And this can lead to a lot of pain, particularly during intercourse, because you lose the suppleness of the tissue.
It's almost like it loses its natural elasticity
Exactly.
and its strength.
Yes.
So it makes sense that it would be
Yeah.
much more prone to tearing and discomfort. Now, the other thing that the sources really hone in on is this chronic inflammation,
Right.
which, just even hearing the word inflammation, it sounds uncomfortable.
Yes.
It sounds like something you don't want to be experiencing.
Exactly.
So talk about that a little bit more,
Yeah, so with chronic inflammation, you have this persistent itching, redness, swelling,
Right.
and these things are, irritating, to say the least,
Yeah.
but they also compromise the skin's natural protective barrier.
Okay.
So what happens is it weakens that barrier and it allows what we call opportunistic pathogens to basically come in and thrive.
So it's like it's creating an opening
Exact.
for these, things that you don't want in there
Exactly.
to set up shop
Yes, yes.
and start causing problems.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, the sources also talk about this disruption of the vaginal microbiome. And I think this is a really, really important point that we should spend some time on.
Yeah.
Because, for someone who might not be familiar with what the microbiome is, and specifically the vaginal microbiome,
Right.
can you just give us a little breakdown of why that's such a crucial factor in vaginal health?
Absolutely. So the vaginal microbiome is basically a community of microorganisms. The good guys, what we call the beneficial bacteria,
Right.
primarily lactobacillus bacteria, they dominate the vaginal microbiome.
Okay.
And these guys, they are the body's primary defense against harmful microbes.
So they're like the first line of defense.
They're the army, they're the ones that are fighting the good fight.
I love it.
Right. And how they do that is they maintain an acidic pH.
Right.
Which is absolutely essential because this acidity prevents the growth of unwanted, organisms that could be harmful.
Like bad guys.
Exactly.
So it keeps everything in check.
Keeps everything in check, in balance. But what happens with lichen sclerosus is, because of that irritation, that chronic irritation,
Okay.
it can throw off that balance.
Right.
So it reduces the number of these good guys, the lactobacillus, and it increases the vaginal pH.
Which means it's becoming less acidic.
Exactly.
So it's basically creating an environment that's much more hospitable to infections.
Exactly.
Exactly. And the sources mention things like bacterial vaginosis,
Right.
BV,
Yes.
yeast infections. These are common problems
Absolutely.
that can arise when the microbiome is disrupted.
Exactly.
So now we've got this situation where, the physical barrier is compromised
Yes.
and the microbial defense system is also compromised.
Also weakened.
It's no wonder that the sources talk about this increased susceptibility to secondary infections.
Absolutely. So you've got this 1-2 punch, right?
Right.
You got a weakened physical barrier, and then you've got a disrupted microbiome. So the body's ability to fend off anything, whether it's bacterial, fungal, or even urinary tract infections. It's just diminished.
Yeah, it's like, you've got a security system,
Right.
but both the locks are broken.
Yeah.
And the alarm's not working.
Exactly.
You're much more vulnerable.
There you are.
And speaking of being vulnerable, the sources also highlight the potential for scarring and some other, long-term complications if this is left unmanaged.
Right.
So what kind of things are we talking about here?
Yeah, so what can happen with untreated lichen sclerosus? The material indicates that you can have scarring,
Right.
even fusion of the tissues around the vulva, which can cause structural changes,
Yeah.
and that can then lead to difficulties with urination.
Okay.
The source also mentions, this is rare,
Right.
but important to note, there's a possible increased risk of squamous cell carcinoma, which is a type of skin cancer.
Wow. So that really highlights the importance of taking this seriously.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, not just ignoring it and hoping it'll go away.
Exactly.
So let's talk about some strategies, right?
Right.
Because the sources also delve into, some key strategies that can be helpful in supporting vaginal health, especially when you're dealing with lichen sclerosus. And the first one they talk about is restoring that vaginal microbiome, right? Like we were just talking about, how important that is.
Yes.
So how do we go about doing that?
So, as we've been talking about, the lactobacillus bacteria,
Right.
they're the heroes, right?
Yes.
And the source specifically mentions, a number of beneficial strains that can be helpful. So Lactobacillus acidophilus, L. rhamnosus, L. reuteri, L. plantarum, and Bacillus coagulans.
Those are quite a mouthful. But it's interesting, right? Because each of those strains has its own specific benefits and actions.
Exactly.
But the acidophilus, I know, is really good for producing lactic acid, which helps maintain that acidity.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Rhamnosus is known for its immune-boosting capabilities.
Like immune resilience.
Reuteri is great for reducing inflammation.
Yes, very good for inflammation.
And then plantarum, I believe, has some antioxidant properties.
It does.
And Bacillus coagulans is just this, really hardy strain that can help prevent overgrowth of, the bad stuff.
Exactly. It's a great combination of different bacteria that can really help restore that balance.
So, when we're talking about restoring the vaginal microbiome, we're talking about probiotics.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And probiotics are basically just these live microorganisms.
Yes.
These good bacteria that we can introduce to help replenish,
Exactly.
the good guys.
Replenish and repopulate.
Exactly. So that's one really important strategy.
Absolutely.
The second strategy that the sources highlight is reducing inflammation.
Right.
Which makes sense, right? Because we talked about how that's a primary issue with lichen sclerosus.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the source mentions a couple of natural anti-inflammatory supports.
Okay.
Like aloe vera and reishi mushroom.
Okay.
Which are very, very soothing to the tissues and can help reduce that inflammation and encourage healing.
So it's like, kind of putting out the fire, so to speak.
Exactly. Bringing in the calming elements,
Yeah.
right, to counteract the fire.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Now, the third strategy that they talk about is strengthening the immune defenses.
Yes.
Now, why is that important in the context of lichen sclerosus?
So we mentioned earlier that there may be an autoimmune component involved, and that's something that the material points out.
Okay.
So having a strong and balanced immune system is really important because it can help support overall vaginal health.
Right.
And also potentially even influence those underlying autoimmune triggers.
So it's about, kind of helping your body's own natural ability to manage this condition.
Exactly. Bolstering your internal defenses.
Exactly.
And then the fourth strategy that the sources mention is actively protecting against those secondary infections.
Right.
We were talking about that, earlier.
Exactly.
So how do we go about doing that?
Yeah. So the material talks about using natural antimicrobial agents,
Okay.
such as things like oregano leaf extract
Okay.
and caprylic acid.
Okay.
And what's really important to note here is that, as the source points out, these agents, they can target the harmful bacteria and fungi without disrupting the balance of those good bacteria that we need.
Right. So it's not like, just wiping out everything. It's a much more
targeted
approach.
Yes.
And then the fifth and final key strategy that the sources highlight is soothing and repairing the vaginal tissue itself.
Right. So this is where we bring back those wonderful ingredients like aloe vera,
which has those soothing properties, but also, antioxidant rich nutrients that can really aid in the healing process and strengthen that vaginal barrier.
So it's about providing relief,
Yes,
but also supporting the body's own natural ability to repair itself.
exactly.
Uh,
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about these 5 key strategies.
Right.
Now, the sources that you shared also introduce a specific product
Yes.
called Balance Complex.
Right.
And they're positioning it as kind of this comprehensive solution for vaginal health.
It is, and it seems to be specifically formulated, for women who are managing conditions like lichen sclerosus.
Exactly.
And what it does is it combines, this blend of probiotics, anti-inflammatory agents, and natural antimicrobials.
Okay.
So the goal is to really offer this multifaceted approach to help restore that balance, reduce inflammation, strengthen the vaginal barrier.
Right, so kind of hitting all those key points.
All those key points.
And the source provides a lot of details about Balance Complex, mentioning that it's been on the market for over 10 years.
Right.
Has over 15 million capsules sold, which is pretty impressive.
That is.
They boast over 17,800 5-star reviews on Amazon.
Wow.
So clearly a lot of people are finding it helpful.
That seems that way, yeah.
And they highlight the fact that it's the only probiotic for women with 100 billion CFUs per gram.
Wow.
Which is, very high concentration of probiotics.
It is. It is.
And they also mention that it contains cranberry and D-mannose, which are known for their urinary health benefits.
Yes, that's a great addition, especially because we talked about how, UTIs can be a problem.
It can be a secondary infection can arise.
Exactly.
They also talk about this maximum strength 17-in-1 strain blend, targeting odor, itching, and discharge, which are all
common issues
that women experience. And they also highlight the fact that it's non-GMO. It's produced in an FDA-registered and GMP-certified facility.
Right.
So those are all good indicators of quality and safety.
Absolutely. You want to make sure that what you're putting in your body is high quality.
Exactly.
And that it's been produced in a safe environment.
And they also offer 100% money-back satisfaction guarantee covered by Amazon's refund policy.
Okay. So you can try it risk-free.
Exactly.
Which is always good.
So let's kind of dive into some of these key ingredients in Balance Complex and talk about, what are the benefits that the source outlines.
Yeah, sounds good.
So first up is the Vaginal Probiotic Blend, which, as we mentioned, is a whopping 100 billion CFUs per gram.
It is, and it's a really good mix of those beneficial bacteria we talked about before.
Exactly. We've got the, Lactobacillus acidophilus, Rhamnosus, Reederi plantarum, and Bacillus coagulans.
Yes.
All working together to restore that balance.
Exactly. And I just want to, quickly recap what each one does.
Okay.
So acidophilus, lactic acid production, maintaining that acidity.
Right.
Rhamnosus, immune resilience. Reederi, inflammation plantarum, antioxidant protection, and coagulans, preventing that overgrowth of harmful bacteria.
Great recap.
Yeah.
And then we have the cranberry and D-mannose blend, which we touched on in the context of urinary tract infections.
Yes.
So just to kind of remind everyone, cranberry, the way it works is it prevents bacteria from sticking to the walls of the urinary tract.
Exactly. It's like it makes it slippery so the bacteria can't latch on.
I love that.
Right. And D-mannose, it's kind of similar in the sense that, you can imagine bacteria having these little Velcro strips.
Okay.
Right? And D-mannose is like a different kind of Velcro that they prefer to stick to.
So it's like pulling them away.
Exactly. So they latch onto the D-mannose and get flushed out.
Instead of latching onto the urinary tract.
Exactly.
Got it. That's a great way to explain it.
Yeah.
And then we've got oregano leaf extract and caprylic acid, both of which we mentioned for their antimicrobial properties.
Yes.
So talk a little bit more about, how those work and what they target.
So oregano leaf extract, it's a natural antimicrobial.
Right.
And it can be very effective against harmful bacteria and fungi.
Okay.
But again, the beauty of it is it doesn't harm the good bacteria.
Right.
Caprylic acid is very specific in targeting fungal overgrowth.
Okay.
Like candida.
Right.
So it helps restore that balance.
So, in the case of, say, a yeast infection, that would be really helpful.
It could be, yes. Yeah.
And then we've also got protease and cellulase listed in the ingredients.
Yes. Now, these are enzymes.
Okay.
And what they do is they help break down biofilms.
Now, what's a biofilm?
So biofilms are kind of like these protective shields
Okay.
that communities of bacteria can create.
So it's like their little fortress.
It is, and it makes them more resistant
Got it.
to treatment.
Okay.
So by breaking down these biofilms, the protease and cellulase can make the other antimicrobial ingredients work better.
So it's kind of like, dismantling the defenses
Exactly.
of the bad guys.
Exactly. Exactly.
We also see aloe vera leaf listed as an ingredient, which we talked about earlier in the context of inflammation.
Yes, and in this formula,
Okay.
it's included for its soothing and anti-inflammatory effects, but also its potential to promote tissue healing.
Okay.
So it's bringing that comfort
Yeah.
and support for repair.
Now we've got arabinogalactin as well.
Right, and this is a prebiotic fiber,
Okay.
and it's believed to support the immune system by nourishing the beneficial gut bacteria.
Got it.
So it kind of works indirectly to
Right.
enhance the immune system.
So it's interesting, right? Because we're talking about vaginal health, but we're also talking about gut health.
We are, and, they're very much connected.
They are.
They're not separate entities.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's something that's becoming more and more recognized.
Now there's also anise seed,
Yep.
black walnut hulls, and wormwood.
Yes, and these are ingredients that, have been used traditionally for various purposes.
Right. So what are they doing in this formula?
So anise seed is believed to have both antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory benefits, so it can help soothe irritation.
Okay.
Black walnut hulls are known for their antibacterial and antifungal properties, so they can help protect against reinfections.
Got it.
And wormwood is understood to support microbial balance and immune resilience.
So kind of all working together to create this
Synergy.
synergy.
Yes.
And then finally we've got reishi mushroom.
Yes, and this is a very interesting ingredient.
Yeah.
We talked about it before in terms of reducing inflammation, supporting the immune system, promoting tissue healing.
Seems like it does a lot.
It does, and it's considered an adaptogen,
Okay.
which means it can help the body adapt to stress
It is.
and promote balance.
So that's important because we know that stress can impact, all aspects of our health.
Absolutely.
So now we've talked about, this balance complex supplement,
Yes.
but the sources also highlight some practical tips for managing lichen sclerosus, just in everyday life.
Yes, they do, and these are really important.
Right. So let's go through those.
Yeah.
So the first one is to avoid harsh products.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
what does that mean in practice?
So you want to use gentle, fragrance-free soaps.
Okay.
Avoid things like douching
Yeah.
scented products,
Right.
because these things can really irritate the tissues.
So it's about minimizing the irritation.
It is, as much as possible.
The second practical tip is to moisturize regularly.
Yes, and you want to use, dermatologist-recommended emollients or ointments
Okay.
that are specifically designed for sensitive skin.
Right, and that can help with dryness, which can
Absolutely. Dryness is a huge issue.
yeah, and just make things worse.
Exactly.
Right. The third tip is to wear breathable clothing.
Yes, so that means opting for underwear made from natural fibers like cotton
Okay.
and choosing loose-fitting clothing.
So it's about, allowing air to circulate.
It is, and reducing friction.
Right.
Because friction can make things worse.
Exactly.
Moisture buildup, all of those things can exacerbate the symptoms.
And then we've got managing stress as another key tip.
Yes, and this is really important because stress can impact, as we said, all aspects of health,
Right.
but it can also worsen autoimmune responses.
Got it.
So incorporating stress-reducing techniques,
Yeah.
yoga, meditation, deep breathing, those can be really helpful.
And then finally, and I think this is really crucial, the sources emphasize following medical treatment plans.
Absolutely. This is paramount.
Right. So if you're, under the care of a healthcare provider
Yes.
and they've prescribed certain medication,
Follow their advice.
follow the advice, be consistent,
Absolutely.
because that's really going to be a cornerstone
It is.
of managing this condition.
It is.
Now, the sources also include a section titled Take Control of Your Vaginal Health.
Right.
And it seems to be kind of like bringing everything together.
It is. It's really summarizing the impact
Yeah.
that lichen sclerosus can have on a woman's well-being and highlighting the importance of addressing these key issues, the inflammation, the microbiome,
Right.
the immune system.
And they also mention balance complex as, one potential tool.
As a potential tool, yes.
Right. But they also, I think, importantly,
Full size.
emphasize all those lifestyle factors
Yes.
that we talked about.
Absolutely.
And working with a healthcare provider.
Yes. Yes.
So it's not just about, taking a pill.
It's not. It's a holistic approach.
It's about really addressing all these different aspects.
It is. It is.
We also noticed a mention of a discount for Balance Complex on Amazon
Oh, nice.
and a website called vaginalquiz.com.
Yeah, I saw that.
Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it. I haven't taken it myself,
Okay.
but it's supposed to be a quick, science-backed online quiz
Okay.
that gives you a personalized analysis of your vaginal health.
Interesting.
And, based on your answers, it can identify potential imbalances.
Okay.
And it may even suggest supplements or lifestyle habits that could be helpful.
So a good resource for people to check out.
It seems like it, yes.
So to really kind of bring it all together,
Yes.
this deep dive has really shown us that lichen sclerosus is a complex condition.
It is.
It's not just about, a few skin changes.
Right.
It has these far-reaching effects
It does.
on vaginal health.
Yes.
Impacting the microbiome, the tissue, the vulnerability to infection.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, the sources really emphasize that, managing this effectively requires a multifaceted approach.
It does. It does.
Restoring that microbiome, reducing the inflammation,
Right.
strengthening those immune defenses, protecting against those infections,
Yeah.
and then, actually soothing and repairing the tissues.
Exactly. And as you said, while, the source mentions Balance Complex
Right.
as a potential tool to help with that,
Right.
they also emphasize those practical tips we
Yeah,
talked about
Exactly.
and the importance of working with a healthcare provider.
Yes, because that's really key.
It is. It is.
Getting that personalized advice
Yes.
and making sure that you're getting the right treatment.
Absolutely, because everyone is different,
Yeah.
and what works for one person may not work for another.
Exactly.
So it's really important to have that individual guidance.
So I think, what's really interesting to me is thinking about this interplay
Yeah.
between the skin, the microbiome, the immune system, and how it all affects vaginal health. It kind of makes you wonder, like, what other things in our daily lives are
Yes.
impacting
In ways we don't even realize.
in ways we don't realize. Exactly. Our diet, stress levels, even the types of fabrics we wear.
Absolutely.
It's all connected.
It is. It is.
And I think that's something that, as we continue to learn more and more about the human body and how all these systems interact,
Yes.
it's just fascinating to think about.
It is, and it really highlights the importance of taking a holistic approach to health.
Exactly.
It's not just about treating symptoms.
Right.
It's about addressing the underlying causes.
It's about the whole picture
Exactly.
and empowering ourselves with knowledge
Absolutely.
to make informed decisions about our health.
I couldn't agree more.
So, I hope this deep dive has been helpful for you guys.
I hope so, too.
It's certainly been eye-opening for me.
Yes. Yeah.
And, as always, we encourage you to do your own research.
Yes.
Talk to your healthcare provider
Absolutely.
and really take control of your health.
I love it.
And be your own advocate.
Yes, be empowered.
Exactly. So, until next time, happy deep dive.
Happy deep dive.